Pittsburgh Steelers had a rough weekend, but the NFL helped them out. Now they're back in the playoff race, but the biggest takeaway from this weekend, hands down, is that they got to stop listening to themselves and they got to start listening to the entire league. What's going on, everybody? I'm Noah Strackbine. Thank you for jumping on to Steelers to Go, your daily to-go cup of Pittsburgh Steelers news and analysis. Find us on youtube.com/allsteelerstalkers. Subscribe anywhere you get your podcast. The Pittsburgh Steelers, they stay in the wild card spot somehow. A crazy weekend of football found them back in the 6th seed. They dropped below the Cleveland Browns, which at this point is no big deal. It's not about fighting for the top of the AFC North or fighting for the top of the AFC in general. It is about staying alive week after week to find yourself in whatever wild card spot you could squeeze into. Right now, the Indianapolis Colts and the Houston Texans give them major boosts as both of them fall over the weekend, and the Pittsburgh Steelers go from 5 to 8 to 6. That's a good place to be, but that's not the biggest takeaway. The biggest takeaway is that everybody watched, and the Pittsburgh Steelers themselves got an opportunity to do so as well, that this league is filled with opportunity, and that opportunity should never be limited. And the Pittsburgh Steelers, no matter how much they want to limit the opportunity and limit their options and limit their belief in further depth chart players, it's got to go out the window. That's an old school mentality. And maybe it's not necessarily an old school mentality. Maybe it's just a Pittsburgh Steelers mentality. But either way, it's something that to this point has not worked, won't continue to work, and the NFL is proving that it's time to put that on the shelf and start to look other places. Let me read off a couple of stat lines here for you that occurred over the weekend. 301 yards, and 2 touchdowns. That was Zach Wilson on his way to beating the Houston Texans. 311 yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception. That was Joe Flacco's stat line on his way to beating the Jacksonville Jaguars. 275 yards and 2 touchdowns to 1 interception. That is Jake Browning's stat line on his way to beating the Indianapolis Colts. You want to know what all those guys have in common? None of them were their team's first option. None of them were their team's second option. They were just the only option that they had available. And they all have different reasons for the Pittsburgh Steelers to listen, but the Pittsburgh Steelers should listen to every single one of them. Joe Flacco is probably the best example. Jake Browning's tough because, hey, look, he's a guy that came out of nowhere that just shows you a good offensive scheme gets the job done. If you are able to have talent around you and a coaching staff that is able to properly coach you, properly put a game plan together, and properly motivate you, yeah, well, yep, good things, they tend to occur in the NFL, even if it's just in short stints. But the Pittsburgh Steelers just need a short stint. They don't need anything crazy. Jake Browning is a prime example that can happen as long as your coaching is up to par. And the Pittsburgh Steelers coaching has not been up to par, has been nowhere close for the last however many years under Mike Tomlin and whoever he has as an offensive coordinator. Joe Flacco is a great example. People are going to say, oh, Joe Flacco's Joe Flacco. He's a Super Bowl winning quarterback. Even if he's old, he still has plenty left in the tank. No, that's not true. Last year, we watched Joe Flacco get the Pittsburgh Steelers kicked out of the postseason because he couldn't score more than 6 points in a ball game with the New York Jets against the Miami Dolphins to win a game. Just couldn't do it. So it's not, oh, just Joe Flacco. He's a Super Bowl winning coach. He's a guy who's done this before. No, he's in a good system with a good scheme, but that's not the point. The point is this. The Cleveland Browns just kept looking until they found somebody. That's what they did. They had P.J. Walker. They weren't thrilled about P.J. Walker. They went to Dorian Thompson-Robinson. Dorian Thompson-Robinson gets hurt. They open the floor to Joe Flacco. Joe Flacco impresses, and they say, look, you're our starter for the rest of the season. Why? Because we were going to keep looking until we found somebody who was going to get us into the postseason and possibly beyond, who was going to give us our best opportunity to win. The Pittsburgh Steelers, to this point, have not done that. And that's Zach Wilson. That is another prime example here, and we'll get there in a second, but let's start with this. Turkey may be great on sandwiches, but there's a better way to break your bad habits. We're not talking about some weird mind voodoo from your crazy neighbor, like shouting up to the stars and yelling, "Help!" We're talking about our sponsor, Fume, and they look at the problem in a different way. Not everything in a bad habit is wrong. So instead of drastic, uncomfortable change, why not just remove the bad from your habit? Fume is an innovative, award-winning flavored air device that does just that. Instead of electronics, Fume is completely natural. Instead of vapor, Fume uses flavored air. And instead of harmful chemicals, Fume uses all-natural, delicious flavors. You get it. Instead of bad, Fume is good. That's a habit you're free to enjoy and makes replacing your bad habit easy. It fills the void in a natural, guilt-free way. Your Fume comes with an adjustable airflow dial and is designed with movable parts and magnets for fidgeting, giving your fingers a lot to do, which is helpful for de-stressing while breaking your habit. I got this thing, and the first thing I noticed was how sharp it looks. This is probably the sharpest looking device I own. And then immediately I start fidgeting with it and realize how awesome that aspect of it is. And then when it comes to the taste, I mean, you can't beat the cool, crisp mint flavor. It's easily my favorite, and I haven't put this thing down since I discovered it. Stopping is something we all put off because it's hard, but switching to Fume is easy, enjoyable, and even fun. Fume has served over 150,000 customers and has thousands of success stories, and there's no reason that can't be you. Join Fume in accelerating humanity's breakup with destructive habits by picking up the Journey Pack today. Head to tryfume.com/allsteelerstalk or scan the QR code and use code allsteelerstalk to get 10% off when you get the Journey Pack today. The Fume Solano launched last November, and you can upgrade your Journey Pack to the Solano to enjoy the premium walnut barrel and onyx black coated mouthpiece that has a smoother finish and still get 10% off. That's tryfum.com and use our code AllSteelersTalk to save an additional 10% off your order today. The Cleveland Browns, the Pittsburgh Steelers, got to watch them this weekend win. Joe Flacco impress. It shows you maybe you should continue to look at options. The Pittsburgh Steelers have another one. His name is Mason Rudolph. Mitch Trubisky has not gotten the job done. He hasn't even been close to getting the job done. He hasn't, to this point, especially this season, been anywhere near up to the bar that the Steelers or anybody else in the league should set for a quarterback, not just to start, but to be put into a ball game at any point. Every time Mitch Trubisky has entered a ball game outside of the Carolina Panthers game last season, since being benched as a starter, he has, struggled mightily. And yeah, there's maybe one or two instances. I guess Tampa Bay would be one of them. But if we're going to be honest, I'm giving out that praise to James Pierre and Josh Jackson and just saying, hey, look, these were two hell of a cornerback duo who stepped onto that football field with no chance and put everything they had out there and won. Not giving it to Mitch Trubisky. The Pittsburgh Steelers have another option. It's Mason Rudolph. And maybe that doesn't work, but if they learned anything this weekend, it's that it's time to test all options until you find something that clicks. And Mitch Trubisky is not clicking, and the longer you wait, the further you're going to sink, the more risk you're going to take. And I get it that Mike Tomlin doesn't live in his fears, but most of the time he does. And most of the time his fear is not, we're not afraid that Mitch Trubisky could struggle. His fear is we're more afraid that Mason Rudolph is going to struggle more. Sometimes that just doesn't happen. And that brings us to Zach Wilson. I believe 301 yards, 2 touchdowns, leads the Jets to a blowout victory over the Houston Texans. Things look great. A week ago, 3 days ago, yesterday, the New York Jets and Zach Wilson are over. That's a divorce waiting to happen. Zach Wilson is probably on his way out of the NFL. He's had more than one opportunity to prove himself in this league, has failed every single time, most times miserably. The New York Jets say, hey, look, sometimes you just got to go back to what you know, and you just got to test everything again. until something works. You got to keep giving yourself an opportunity, keep running through the cycle. Maybe something works. Test the hot hand. Mason Rudolph's had opportunities in this league with the Pittsburgh Steelers, and a lot of people bring those up as reasons not to start him. They say, oh, well, I get it. He's 5-4-1 as a starter, but there's a reason that he hasn't played for the Steelers in 2 seasons. I don't really think that that's a valid excuse anymore. I think that if Mitch Trubisky looked good, yeah, there's no reason to have this conversation because Mason Rudolph hasn't played football in 2 years. But Mitch Trubisky's looked so bad that sometimes you just got to go back and give everybody another opportunity. And maybe Mason Rudolph doesn't work out, but maybe he does. And we have no idea. All we know right now, and all the Pittsburgh Steelers know right now, is that Mitch Trubisky is going to struggle. And Mitch Trubisky is not going to give you a very high opportunity to go win a ball game. And don't get me wrong, that's not all on Mitch Trubisky. Again, Jake Browning, prime example. Sometimes your coaching staff is so bad that you cannot succeed no matter how hard you try. And the Pittsburgh Steelers, while I think Eddie Faulkner is a phenomenal running backs coach, and I think Mike Sullivan is a great guy and probably a good quarterbacks coach, they're just not the duo that the Pittsburgh Steelers could lean on. And that happens. They're interim head coaches, or interim offensive coordinators / play callers. That's okay. The bar isn't very high. It's just whatever we have available that we could test out and see if it works, because the last guy just wasn't good enough to have in the building. That's okay. Tough spot to be, but you can't judge Faulkner and Sullivan for that. You just have to look at them and say they were tossed into a very tough situation. They're trying to make the most out of it, even if they're not equipped to do so. Mitch Trubisky, you watch this weekend and you got it clear as day. Sometimes the NFL is just about giving everybody an opportunity because you never know who's going to work, ever. And maybe Mason Rudolph works, but the Pittsburgh Steelers got to test it out. And they got to stop worrying about whatever before they worry themselves out of the playoff race. And that's very likely to happen at this point. I get it. They're the 6th seed. I get it. They got lucky. They continue to get lucky. It's like everybody else. I sat around this weekend, and I talk about fantasy football all the time, but I sat around this weekend and watched my team score like 60 points and get blown out for the 6th, 7th time in a row, and I still somehow snuck my way in as that 8th seed into the postseason. The Steelers are not going to get that lucky. They're just not. But if they continue to live in their fears and continue to live in limitations, things are just going to sink fast. And that's just where they are. Sometimes the NFL is about watching, and thankfully the Steelers got an opportunity to do so this weekend. And this weekend, what it showed is, hey, if you were watching the Browns game, if you were watching the Jets game, if you were watching the Bengals game, the 3 games the Steelers should be paying attention to, yeah, it's time to start Mason Rudolph. Don't hold high expectations. Just look at it very simply. Mitch Trubisky isn't it, wasn't it, isn't working. And in this league, you never know who's going to click.